in creating grafts for rhinoplasty. And that was a tractable problem that a group of undergrads with no real world experience at that point, all textbook experience, were able to put our heads together, do prototyping, and meaningfully solve in a couple years.
We ended up publishing a paper on it just to establish efficacy of the device, which was also a really helpful thing. It's published. There's data that backs up our claims that we're making.
Welcome to the Physician Pharmacist podcast, a show designed to shed some light on a very unusual pathway into medicine. I'm your host, Nathan Gartland, and I'm a licensed pharmacist and current anesthesiology resident. I'm also the author of PharmD to MD and the owner of the Physician Pharmacist Company. As this podcast has grown, we have had the tremendous opportunity to broaden our scope and explore other non-traditional healthcare careers. Tune in to hear from our non-traditional experts serving at the frontier of medicine, technology, and innovation. Today, I'm thrilled to welcome two incredible innovators and rising stars in the medical and engineering fields. I'll be joined by future doctors Sabin Karki and Brooke Stephanian, who are both third-year medical students at Indiana University School of Medicine, and each having a background in biomedical engineering from Johns Hopkins University. Serving as co-founders for the startup company Benegraft, they were able to develop a novel surgical instrument that was used to accelerate and simplify graft preparation in rhinoplasty procedures. They are able to take their invention to market, where it was acquired by Osteoport in 2021. In addition to their engineering exploits, they bring experience from working with NASA, venture capital, and patent ownership. Together, Sabin and Brooke are reshaping the medical landscape one invention at a time. All righty, welcome to the podcast today, guys.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
I'm super excited to kind of get into your really interesting history. And so to kick things off, can you tell us a little bit about where you're from and what your life was like before going to medical school?
Yeah, I can start. So my name is Sabin Karki. Right now, I'm a third-year medical student at Indiana University School of Medicine, along with Brooke. We both have a background in biomedical engineering and are both native Hoosiers that both grew up in the town of Terre Haute, Indiana. And we both had a lot of kind of parallel experiences across engineering, entrepreneurship, some dabbling in consulting as well, but all within healthcare. And for me, that's sort of shown me how exciting it is to be kind of at the forefront of innovation, be learning from people who are really innovating at the cutting edge in both healthcare delivery and engineering. And then also the excitement of being able to work with patients, which is why I'm in medical.
Yeah, I mean, I'd echo that. Luckily, our paths were pretty similar, but proud to be a Hoosier. And from there, I was actually diagnosed with type 1 diabetes when I was in high school, which really spurred my interest in devices, medical devices. And so that led me to Hopkins to study biomedical engineering. And from there, we worked on our device and then eventually dabbled here and there in a few other things before going to medical school.
That's super interesting. And I'm curious to know, was medical school always the plan down the line, or did you guys start out with this biomedical engineering background and then kind of fall in love with it later on?
I think I was always interested in healthcare kind of from a young age. I was lucky to have a dad who's like in family medicine. And so being exposed to that kind of always had me thinking about medicine or, being in a job where you're working directly with people that you're helping. I think my big kind of aha moment for wanting to go into medicine specifically happened in Nepal. So my parents are both from Nepal, and I had the chance to go there for a couple summers during high school. And I think it was my sophomore year summer after my sophomore year of high school. And we visited my kind of dad's ancestral village. And it was really interesting because, it was a tiny, tiny community only accessible by by dirt road and motorbike with like one general store, no hospital, no running water. And what was interesting was, despite that, all of the 18 to 28-year-olds had smartphones and Facebook. And so there was one Wi-Fi router in the whole community. So I'd kind of gather around that in the evenings, and that would be the socialization. And to me, that showed me how, consumer technology can reach places even before sometimes government infrastructure or traditional healthcare modalities can. And that's what really pushed me into studying biomedical engineering, because I wanted to find new ways to reach under-resourced areas, underserved groups using existing technologies. And I learned a lot about what is practical, what isn't, through that journey and some of the research work I did as an undergrad. But another really important personal thing I learned was how much I liked working with patients directly. And sometimes I felt like, as exciting as it was to work on new engineering problems, I was really missing that last piece of that last mile of like actually talking to the patient, understanding how do they use this device, what do they like, what do they don't like about it. And that is what drew me back to medicine and wanting to kind of deliver patient care directly. But I think I always want to have a hand in entrepreneurship and innovation, no matter what.
Yeah, I think for me the story is pretty similar, and I think for a lot of biomedical engineers who transfer into medicine, it's largely the same, where you really want to have this patient impact personally, like on that personal level, but then also keep your hand in the engineering side. And so you have this deep understanding of medicine and the clinical workflows, but then you're also able to look back and say, how can we innovate on the tools that currently exist?
Yeah, and I think also just from like setting yourself up, like I do a lot of medical school admissions counseling, and like having just a biomedical engineering background is like so appealing to a lot of programs. And like for our listeners who are curious, like because you have a backup, but you also have this like dual trade that you can like really speak on. And I want to get into it right now, but the resources you had at Johns Hopkins, I'm curious to know like how that kind of spiraled into creating like your first company.
Yeah, absolutely. So I would say 100% agree that biomedical engineering was like a very unique, I would say, like selling point. I don't think we intentionally, at least, we didn't do it with intention of being like, oh, we want to, use this for marketing to med school later, but it happened to help. And I genuinely believe that every medical student today needs to have some sort of exposure to design things. Or, not even talking about, actual entrepreneurship or engineering or that, but the ability to identify problems and solve them kind of at scale is so, so important. It goes beyond just understanding the patient themselves too. And, seeing patterns in patient data and community data. But to your question about how Hopkins specifically kind of empowered us, I would say I underestimated how much of a difference it would make in my approach towards really my career and my goals. Because when I was in high school, I kind of had this very vague idea of, okay, I'll kind of follow the traditional pre-med pathway, which was very possible with a BME degree. And then I wanted to, what did I want to do? I wanted to become a surgeon, get an MD, MBA, all the kind of the traditional like ticker tape type things. And as I got into the engineering program, there was this amazing program we were both part of called the design team program within the biomedical engineering department. And through that program, groups of students, and Brooke and I co-led a team together, are paired with a clinical faculty mentor from Johns Hopkins Hospital, could be from any area, and they will kind of pitch different needs in like a Shark Tank style night to us one evening back in like late 2017. And we were lucky to work with Dr. Patrick Byrne, who at the time worked as a facial and reconstructive surgeon at Johns Hopkins Medicine. And we worked with him on a clinical problem that surrounded basically the frustration of creating cartilage grafts using cadaveric tissue from dead bodies or autologous tissue from a patient's rib or their ear or other parts of their nose, and creating grafts for rhinoplasty. And that was a tractable problem that a group of undergrads with no real real world experience at that point, all textbook experience, were able to put our heads together, do prototyping, and meaningfully solve in a couple of years. And I think being able to have the ability to work in a sandbox like that, in a riskless sandbox where doing well on these kind of entrepreneurial engineering activities was just part of our academic program was really helpful, because it limits the misalignment that sometimes faces college students when they're like, do I want to work on my, school activities, or do I want to work on outside activities? And this kind of aligned those two things.
Yeah, I guess for me, I'd say I'm a big proponent of working on entrepreneurial projects while you're in school, because you have that safety net of school. And the worst case is, what if your startup fails? Okay, well, you're still a student and you're still working towards your long-term goals of your career goals. So I've always been pretty big on trying to pursue whatever you want to if you're a student, and especially because you have a whole network at your disposal of people that you can reach out to. You have your school's network, and people love it when you cold email them and say, hey, I'm a student and I'm trying to solve this problem that like more many more people are happy to talk to you, I feel like, when you introduce yourself that way.
Yeah, I think that's really great advice. And there were a lot of great nuggets in there of what you guys were just talking about. And I agree with like that whole sandbox mentality where like it's okay where you can fail in that particular scenario and it's safe. Like you don't have millions of dollars on the line, theoretically
Exactly.
speaking, quite yet. Or at least you have the help of the resources, at your disposal. So I think that's awesome. And so it sounds like Johns Hopkins really fostered a lot of growth for both of you. And that led to the development of this like novel technology. So tell me a little bit more about like what it was exactly. Like you kind of, gave us the details of the plan, but how did you guys get that? Like what was the actual goal?
Yeah, absolutely. So kind of set the stage. So the way our undergrad program worked, or the design team program worked, was we would basically shadow in different departments, at Hopkins Hospital, another facility for I think 2 to 3 weeks, different departments. And one of those departments was within the otolaryngology group. And so through that process, we've met Dr. Patrick Byrne. He's at Cleveland Clinic now. He's the head of their, I think, integrated surgery division at Cleveland Clinic. And what we were finding was typically when a surgeon would perform a rhinoplasty, there is one method of processing this cadaveric tissue called the Tasman. Through this method, you take that grafted tissue, whether it's from that cadaver or from the patient's own rib or ear, and you dice it up with a scalpel into these tiny 1 millimeter sized pieces. Then you take something called Tisiel, which is fibrin glue. You inject it onto that conglomerate tissue on your little cutting board, and specialized cutting boards or just like a typical mat, however you want to do it. And it takes on an almost Play-Doh-like consistency. And in something like rhinoplasty, where it's very important to have function and it's also important to have cosmetic preservation, you're going to want to have a lot of malleability with that actual tissue construct. And this method of using tiny, tiny particles worked really well. Now, the problem was that, surprisingly, cutting up this cartilage took forever. Like it could take anywhere from 30 minutes up to an hour, depending on how much tissue you needed. So surgeons were really needing a faster way to do this. At first, Dr. Barnett brought this problem to us, and then we validated it by going and, just kind of cold emailing, cold reaching out to a lot of different ENT surgeons across the U.S., really, at both private practice, within academic centers, communities, kind of across the board. And for those surgeons who did perform this kind of procedure, they were like, yeah, we do have this problem. Or there's one surgeon we spoke to, I think in California, who was like, well, I don't have this problem, but that's because me and 3 others all chop tissue at the same time. It's like, that's not a good use of resources, right? And so we began, that's sort of the problem, the primary problem. How can we more quickly enable this safer procedure that has better outcomes for patients? And kind of open it up to a wider swath of surgeons without compromising the actual viability of the cells in that cartilage, especially coming from the patient.
Oh, yeah, that's super interesting. And so I think it's cool. You identify that there's a pain point right here in this process, and then you didn't just like run full steam at it. You recognize there's a pain point problem, but then you went and collected more data and generalized it out to the public. And I think that's something that a lot of startup people struggle with, is kind of going out there and asking all these questions, collecting survey data. That's one of the essential parts to getting a project off the ground. So I think that's really cool that you guys were able to facilitate that. And so you collected your data and you knew this was a global issue. So how did you kind of hit the ground running and actually start developing the solution?
So we developed our sort of core list of needs through those interviews that we'd had with 20 to 30 surgeons at that time point, and we got more interviews later. But it came down to number one must-have need was like reduce this time. Number 2 was maintain cell viability, I think, and then number 3 was
preserve like loss of cartilage, I think.
Exactly, because exactly right, because it's like
sometimes when you chop up this cartilage, so many of these pieces will fly off the table, and this is precious material that you need to re-implant in the nose. Mm-hmm. So that was a pretty big design criteria that we needed to fulfill. And so we took a lot of inspiration from food processing tools, honestly. Like there's a lot of garlic choppers out there. If you really look, there's so many ways to dice up garlic. And we just kept playing around with tools. We would order some on Amazon and just mess around with, I think at first we found some rabbit ears that a lab
yeah.
wasn't like they were using rabbits, and after they would sacrifice them, they would give us the ears. So just really asking around and trying to be cost effective, I guess, and in that way was pretty big because we didn't have a lot of funding at that point. And really just getting physical and trying to do as much as we could with the cartilage and coming up with novel techniques to dice it was the key. And eventually one of our team members started, what was the type of blade? The mezzaluna?
Yeah, it's like it's a mezzaluna blade, exactly.
Yeah, and so it's this used for, like, I think pizza. It's like a curved blade with two handles at the end, and you kind of do this, and so then we realized, well, a curved blade seems to work very well. So then we started kind of going in that direction, and we looked into like pizza cutter style blades, and those were incredibly effective. So we just kind of iterated from there, and it seemed to work out pretty well.
So then you started using basically this curved blade, and at what point did you then start going to like human subjects, basically? Like, what, am I getting too far ahead of myself here in the process? Or was it like, oh, we have proof of concept with the rabbit ears, and now maybe we can start, fundraising to actually get some capital?
Right. So that's exactly the same question we had. We were green, right? So we're like, okay, do we need to do human testing? Do we need to do live? What is the level of testing we need to do? And so that took us to, talking to FDA consultants, doing a lot of Googling, and figuring out, okay, the best way to determine what our burden from a testing standpoint is going to be is to understand sort of the regulatory framework, right? And so we knew we were going to be class 1 because it wasn't a life-saving device, nothing super complex, purely mechanical device, nothing electrical about it, which is good. And so we were like, are we going to be class 1, go through the 510 pathway? And it turned out we are exempt because we're processing tissue externally to the body. And we're not adding a drug to it, we're not manipulating it, we're not eating it, nothing. In fact, we were the regulatory equivalent of a scalpel, which is great for us. And a scalpel, of course, you don't have to do human subjects testing to get that onto the market, right? It's a matter of showing, is this material not going to leach off onto skin? If you put it in a bath, is anything bad going to happen? Will it deteriorate over time? If it's reusable, can you actually sterilize it properly? Or if it's like reposable, both reusable and disposable parts. And based off, those considerations, how much it would cost to make those kinds of different design decisions, we found out the best thing to do would be to make this a completely disposable device, where it's a single use per case, comes sterilized. And from a testing standpoint, all you have to show is that you're using basically like good manufacturing practices, wherever it's manufactured. So we don't have to do any actual clinical testing. This can all be done just using existing framework for 510K exempt devices, which made it very, very easy from regulatory standpoint. It requires only FDA registration, no clearance.
So then you kind of got to the bottom of how you were going to classify this device. And from there, did you build your minimal viable product at that point? Or, okay, so that was the next step. And then how did you figure out the scalability of it? So like finding a manufacturer to actually produce this.
Yeah, we asked around. There are a couple companies that have been spun out of the design program. So we really started talking to some people who have gone through the process before, asked around and tried to see who they were using. We talked to a couple manufacturers in the US, then looked into them, tried to price it out, and then ended up talking to a medical device company in South Korea after we had patented our device, and they ended up asking to license so they could manufacture with their manufacturer.
Yeah, I mean, even just getting the patent itself, like that's a pretty expensive process. It's like $5,000 or something like that. I've looked into some provisional patents before, and I was like, oh man, this is a lot.
Yeah,
Sure,
I think that's the good and bad of working with the university. So for us, since we were with Hopkins, we ended up going through them. So they would pay for everything, but of course take a hefty chunk.
Right. So then you guys formulated the company Benegraft like filed legally and everything like that. And then they are basically like a huge stakeholder in that particular company. Like they own like a percentage of shares. Is that how it works
Correct.
exactly? Interesting.
Exactly. So based off the like licensing agreement we had with Osteopore in South Korea, there's like, that we work with the Johns Hopkins Tech Ventures lawyers to make sure they're on board with that, since they are, even though we're the inventors, we've effectively assigned the ownership of the patent to Hopkins so that they'll cover those legal fees up front.
That's awesome. So, I mean, it's definitely like a pretty streamlined process to get to that point where if you were to do this independently, I can't imagine how difficult and how financially challenging that may have been. So that's great that you had this opportunity.
I agree. I think if we were to do this independently, one, I think, several things enabled us to have a successful outcome. One is, despite the fact that we had a fairly small market, right? There's not a whole lot of facial plastic surgeons, and there's not a whole lot of facial plastic surgeons that are necessarily relying on diced cartilage glue grafts for most of the procedures they're doing. That's a pretty narrow vertical. And so doing this on our own would have required, one, most likely kind of the sell before you build approach, kind of figuring out who are the actual hospitals, clinicians who are willing to pre-order buy this now, so that they can kind of upfront fund the patenting and all of that. But we were lucky that we didn't have to go through that kind of more arduous pathway. So this was just a very, we took the low-hanging path, but we learned a lot that we can kind of, apply in the future and all of that.
Absolutely. I mean, the experience that you guys have gained from this is going to allow for you to potentially be consultants down the line. And then that can be also something that you could monetize as well and build your own kind of consulting firm off of, all the experience. So hint, maybe that is something you're thinking about. But anyways, and so let's finish up with Benegraft here. And so you guys were able to get the product to market. You found a manufacturer. And how did you get this to the point where you found someone to actually purchase the technology?
So honestly, it was just cold calling and using the network. I'm trying to remember a couple of, I think, so Marina Medical was one of the first people that we contacted. And I just cold emailed, I think maybe like manager or
like a sales VP or account manager.
Someone, yeah. And I said, hey, I'm a student. We have a product that we think you might be interested in. And we talked to actually several people about how to do this. Some of the best advice that we got was, one, looking into adjacent markets seemed to be a pretty interesting strategy. So, for instance, with this, it's facial plastics, and OMFS is like a similar space. So, looking into the dental space and looking at who is manufacturing and selling dental products. So we kind of looked into that for a little bit. Then we looked into other who's selling like other otolaryngology surgical tools. And so we, just cold emailed Marina Medical. Yeah, just had a call with them. We had to sign an NDA, have them sign an NDA for our device. And just had a bunch of back and forth with how our tool worked. We would send them our design history file and everything, showing them the data of how it dices, the timing and everything. We ended up publishing a paper on it just to establish efficacy of the device, which was also a really helpful thing. Because then it's something you can send to a potential interested company and say, hey, look, this is our device, and it's published. There's data that backs up our claims that we're making. And then we went to a AAFPRS, the American Academy of Facial Plastic and Reconstructive Surgery. That's a mouthful. And we presented our tool there, and met with some other medical device companies that, how they have like reps usually. And so we talked to some people there, got some contacts. They acted interested. And of course, I feel like the big thing with this is there's so much failure involved. Like, I feel like that's the one thing that we keep glossing over is that, we were successful. But I think at the end of the day, there were so many times that we failed. And I remember with Marina, I thought that we had it in the bag. I thought that they were so excited to sign this licensing deal and it would work out. And after I think about like a month and a half, they were like, yeah, we're going to pass. We don't want this. And I remember being so disappointed. I was like, we have to do this all over again. But really, it's just a lot of trial and error and using the network. So ultimately, it was a firm, I think Sabin mentioned, Osteopore in South Korea, that and they work in the I think they have like bone grafts actually.
Hmm.
They're in that space. I don't know if that's 100% correct, but
And after obviously selling off the product, like you had mentioned, like it's been such a long road at that point. Like, did you kind of feel bittersweet in a sense where like you're letting go of like everything that you've been working on for so long? So like, what was that experience like?
well, I think for me is interesting. I remember when we first started working on this, we had a team of six other students, and we were co-leading this team, and I had everyone sit down and we kind of discussed as your group what our goals even would be for this project, because at the end of the day, we're taking this class for credit. So like, really for most people, it's just, I want to get the credit and get out. Except our team was pretty ambitious in a way that was unique. I remember, I mean, even for me, I was like, oh, I'd just be satisfied if we get a patent on this device. Like that would be cool. Like I never in my wildest dreams could have imagined that we would actually take it to market. Um, so I think my expectations were a little low, but I'm glad it worked out.
Yeah, you never know where life's going to take you. And it's funny how like one opportunity kind of spirals into the next and the next, and then you're, a million steps ahead and you're thinking like, wow, how did I get here? But it's been just that combination of that progressive increase in like what's the exponential rise, like 1% every day. If you get 1% better, then, you're going to have a lot larger percentage increase at the end. So
Right.
that's awesome. And so after you had kind of parted ways with Benegraft at that point, what was next for you guys? Was this when medical school started, or was this kind of happening behind the scenes while you were already starting with medical school? What exactly was the timeline?
So we officially started Benegraft as a sort of within the confines of the school project in 2018. And then by 2020, once Brooke had graduated in 2019, soon after that, at that point, we were incorporated, kind of had the patent already filed, the provisional filed. When I graduated in 2020, we were in the midst of thinking deeply about the sort of whole licensing thing. And so we continued working on it sort of in the background, but at the same time, we were still kind of furthering our education. So our whole team kind of went to different places all over the U.S. None of us really stayed in Baltimore. Brooke went out you were in San Francisco. She was working briefly. Well, I won't speak for you or NASA. She got master's. I returned home to Indiana, and that's when I did I did my master's in cellular and integrative physiology at IU School of Medicine. And that was more so, I spent 4 years doing mostly engineering stuff. I've been pretty surprisingly divorced from sort of the typical pre-med path. So I kind of needed a refresher on that again, go back to, what's it like to sit down and just memorize stuff out of a book again instead of like building stuff, And so that was good prep for med school. But as I applied for med school out of that cycle, I still had to wait another year, because that application process, of course, is prolonged. So during that time, I went to, or I was working at a pharmaceutical sort of sales consulting company, which was an interesting experience. This was very different than anything I'd done. It was less so management consulting and more so consulting, advising like sales teams that are trying to position drugs that are already on the market or new drugs that they're revealing. And it was really interesting because it showed me how important the post-launch market surveillance and market maintenance is. It's so easy to get caught in the trap, and I've seen it time and again. I've been involved, in a way we were lucky we didn't fall into this trap at Benegraft, where you create a compelling technical solution that's exciting to the engineering, to the engineering team, it's exciting to the clinicians, but who holds the pocketbook? Who holds the power to make that a reality, to actually bring it into the school? And for better or worse, that's often going to be, the value analysis committee at a hospital, or whoever the decision makers are. And I had much more exposure to that during my time with consulting, which was interesting. So it was kind of like a short course in a different side of medicine. Which is important, but I find doesn't invigorate me as much as like the engineering and clinical side.
Yeah, so it sounds like it kind of gave you the background to see the other side of what, all the behind the scenes stuff that goes into like the medical decision making. Like, yeah, we want to do this because it has great outcomes for this patient, or this technology is really revolutionary. However, there's the financial, consequences of bringing that solution on board, makes sense for the hospital system as a whole? Is the benefit worth that particular amount? So that's interesting that you were able to get that exposure. And Brooke, you said you were at NASA too. Is that right?
Yeah. I applied for a summer internship on a whim. I guess it had always been my dream to work for NASA. Just thought of, I don't know, very passionate about aeronautics. And I really love planes on the side. But yeah, so I applied for a position that I saw and got to work on a bioreactor that we ended up sending to the ISS a few times. Did some osteoblast research studies, which was pretty interesting. Just looking at how they react in microgravity, looking at like bone density in space. But that really introduced me to the field of aerospace medicine. So I feel like that's kind of been in the back of my mind this whole time. But I ended up working there for a summer and then pursuing my master's in translational medicine in a combined program at Berkeley and UCSF, which was really fun, a really good way to wrap up Benegraft. And then ended up going back to NASA for a little bit to do some thermal protection systems work with them. So that was really fun, but not in the realm of medicine at all. And then after that, took a little break from that and went into consulting as well at a firm in San Francisco called Health Advances. But I think I really learned a lot from that too, just a lot that they don't teach you in medical school.
Absolutely. It's funny too, like you guys are living like parallel lives at this point, and now you ended up going to medical school at the same year too. What was that like, by chance, or just like you happened to be applying at the same time? And
yeah, I think it was kind of serendipitous. It was nice. Like, we were obviously aware that,
Sure.
we were both applying to medical school, and we both are, you can't count on going to the same medical school, right? So you apply far and wide, see where you get and see what makes sense. And IU sort of made the most sense. And it was just funny that it worked out such that, she took an extra gap year and I didn't, and I took 2 gap years. She took, I think, right? I took 2, you took 3. Yeah. And then we both ended up being in the same intern class. We were at different campuses. I was in our original hometown of Terre Haute, Indiana, at that satellite campus, which is hilarious. And she was at the Indianapolis campus the first 2 years. But now that we're both in our third year, we're both co-located in Indianapolis, which is nice. So that makes sort of collaboration, thinking through, ideas and what's next, kind of a lot easier and more fun.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially since you said half of your team ended up moving all over the place. So.
Oh yeah. It's funny. I mean, we were a team of engineers, but I literally think most of us went to medical school. Like almost all of us did.
Wow. Well,
Yeah.
speaking about medical school, what has that experience been like so far? What are the pros and cons in comparison to maybe engineering?
It's different. I mean, I think for me, it's been a lot harder than engineering. I think I have a math brain and I have a brain that wants to problem solve all the time. So being forced to memorize every facet of the human body has been incredibly difficult, but it's definitely been rewarding and very fun.
Yeah, I think I would largely agree. And we've invented many myths. So how medical compares to engineering, you just, try to figure out, what is the meta here? What exactly is different? And I feel like, engineering, and this is just my sort of naive viewpoint on it. Most people may not agree. I think you're taught 40 or 50% of what you need to know. And then you're given a problem set of like 3 or 4 problems and then like a week to figure it out, right? And it's all about critical thinking and thinking outside the box and collaboration and talking to your friends. And you realize, oh, wow, I really couldn't have solved this problem without talking to Brooke or wherever else, right? And medicine's like the polar opposite. Medicine is you have a collection of facts that have been kind of laid out for you in a curriculum, and you memorize those and you pattern match. And so you are learning 80 to 90% of the foundational material and using critical. I don't want to say you don't use critical thinking, but you, like, the mental effort, it's like the RAM is placed somewhere totally different than when you're doing engineering. And for me, it was quite a transition. And I feel like now that I'm finally in clinicals, I don't know if Brooke agrees, but I find it much more rewarding and exciting because it's like, oh, wow, a patient comes in with congestive heart failure. They have this sign that you're literally thinking about it like a pump in your head. And you're like, you got to squeeze the fluid off of them with some Lasix or furosemide. And that's the fun part to me. I enjoy that more so than sitting down in front of you world.
Yeah, that's totally understandable. And yeah, I can imagine the transition was definitely difficult because like you said, it's very like hands-on, like engineering, like you're thinking through solutions and things. And I feel like in medicine, I don't know if it's just because of the curriculum and how it's structured, but they kind of almost teach you to just accept what this is instead of kind of thinking about different ways of improving the systems.
Yeah.
And I think, if we incorporated that same kind of mindset into the curriculum itself now, I think we'd also be able to solve a lot of our own problems. So that would be a really interesting kind of thought experiment to run or have that integrated into the education system.
100% agree. I mean, I'm sure schools like Carl, Illinois, kind of take that engineering approach to medicine. And we have both, a couple of classmates from various years who've gone there. And I think that's interesting too. I think it's all important. Just thinking about medicine in new ways is so important.
Perfect. And so now that you're in your third year of medical school, arguably a lot of people will say that it's the most challenging year just because of the amount of work and hours that you're expected to work on top of like the behind the scenes shelf exams you have to study for, and you have step 2 looming in the background. So has it been difficult for you guys to kind of keep up with the side projects and the side hustles that you enjoy?
I'd say when I'm on my surgery shelf, or my surgery clerkship, which I just finished, yes, that's been hard to do anything outside of that. But I think in general, for the kinds of things, like if you're passionate about it, you'll make time for it. And I mean, I feel like everyone knows that. But I think, especially for us, this kind of work is what grounds us and brings us back into reality and makes all of the clinical hustle worth it. Because then we're really taking what we've seen as we've been working with patients and as we've been working with other physicians. I think that's definitely been really helpful and kind of pushes us forward in that way.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the more interesting things that we've gotten to be part of now, uniquely, that I think Benegraft enabled us to do was, so Brooke had reached out on behalf of us to a local venture capital firm in Indianapolis. I think was it last fall. And so, they sort of very graciously allowed us to work with them and learn from them on due diligence, evaluating different companies, really going out there and knocking on people's doors, of companies that are competitors to some of the companies we were evaluating, and saying, hey, what's good in the space, what's tough, what are the challenges you run into, and being able to use that design thinking brain outside of the clinic and outside of running questions all day, as is also kind of been keeping us going in an exciting way. Because you're always now thinking about what are other people thinking about in medicine or not thinking of, who are innovating in the space. Right?
Wow. Yeah, that's really cool. Like how did you go? You just sent an email out and said, hey, like we're super interested in doing like an internship, and they're like, we'll create a position for you? Or how did you guys facilitate that?
Pretty much what happened.
Yeah, we were working on another device with a clinician at IU. And we ended up pitching it at like a pitch competition, and one of the judges was the chief medical officer of this VC firm. So I saw him and I like went back home and I was like, wait, hold on, I think maybe we should email him. And yeah, worked out from there.
Potential investor, who knows?
That'd be nice. I mean, that's the thing, right? It's like, as you know, it's like putting yourself out there is literally 80% of it, especially when you're a student and you have the luxury of being someone who's seen as a learner. And, I'm always saying we should be lifelong learners, but it can be hard when you're kind of in an established career and you're expected to really know what you're doing all the time versus when you're in our position and you're allowed to kind of make mistakes and ask the dumb questions more easily. And I think that has been so key to any wins we've had, which is just knocking on doors over and over again. I mean, we're skipping over the countless incubators, the countless advisors, the many different other startup ideas we've been working on. I mean, Brooke used to be on a team that was working on, like clear math before COVID, like solving a problem way ahead of this time, which ended up being massively successful, and like turning X-rays into 3D visualizations that would auto detect where the nodules are. And it's like, And I've been on part of different projects as well, like smart stethoscopes and different robotic surgery groups. And it's like those have all had different varying levels of success, but they have all we've been trying to wrap up all of that knowledge to one narrative into, whatever problem we're solving.
Yeah, it's interesting. You mentioned like incubators too. Did you guys apply to like Y Combinator or anything, like any big ones like that?
None of the traditional ones, because we weren't traditional tech. And
Mhm.
the other important thing, I learned this very early, which was, so early on in Benegraft's time when we had like, I don't know, a couple thousand in the bank, it's like I went to go and talk to a venture capital investor down at power plants in Baltimore, at early Charm, Ken Malone. Anyways, I'm sure he'd be, I talked to him, and basically in the nicest, most diplomatic way ever, he was just like, this is cool, but like, this is cool is the best thing I can say, but like, this is not going to be something that is VC fundable. The multiples aren't there. There's no reason, it's the definition of a one product company, which you don't want in a company, right? There's no platform here. And he said that in the nicest words possible. But it's like, that taught me also about, what is it that different groups are looking for. So that's also important. We didn't aggressively chase down outside investors because we didn't need them because of the low burden to get this to market from a regulatory standpoint, which is most of your, along with the manufacturing pathway. But in terms of incubators, so we worked with within Johns Hopkins. We worked with the Fuel Incubator at what was then the Fast Forward Innovation Center. That we also worked with Loyola University, which graciously we worked with their director, Wendy Bolger. She's been amazing. And even though we weren't affiliated with Loyola in Baltimore, we worked with some of our best advisors who helped us with our licensing outreach through the Entrepreneurs Incubation.
Look at that. Well, you definitely made use of all of your resources, which is great. And you took the shot though. And I think a lot of people, that's where they trip up, is where they don't, take these opportunities. And so good for you guys for doing that. And speaking of opportunities, what kind of doctors are you planning on becoming? Is it too soon to tell?
I have no idea. I'm still trying to figure that out. Especially in the middle of third year. I mean, I really am trying to use that as the time to kind of figure out, what do I want to do? What do I like? What do I not like? I mean, I do like working with medical devices. I will say that. I know that much.
So I'm kind of caught between a couple different things. Like, yeah, otolaryngology is super exciting because we were exposed to that early in undergrad. At the same time, I like adored the psychiatry rotation I was on. The ability to sit down, take a really thorough history from a patient, and listen to them, and speak at length with them was very exciting to me. Kind of what I imagined, a good doctor would always do in my head. Yeah, I just got off internal medicine, and that was also really cool. Sometimes the pace is frenetic, but at the same time, it's like you are truly taking care of, what are the most common problems that are affecting Americans, and they're coming in. And it's like, from a standpoint of harvesting and identifying problems that are ripe for innovation, I mean, what better way than to be in IM, or an adjacent field like FM. So that's interesting to me. It's still a little bit too early to say for me, but I'm hoping I got to have it figured out soon.
Don't worry, you
Same.
guys have plenty of time still, plenty of time. And yeah, I think it's also important to weigh like your outside interests, like you've mentioned, where if you pick something that is, very hour intensive, you might not have the opportunities to explore some of these things on the sides just because the residencies are so demanding. So a lot on the table right here, but you'll have plenty of time to figure it out. So I'm confident you'll do great.
Thank you.
All righty. Well, we're getting to the end of our interview today, and we're going to wrap up with our famous 3 questions. And so I'll give you guys the opportunity to kind of piggyback off of this, because there might be some redundancy on some of your answers. So I don't know if you want to say something for each one or not, but we'll start with this. How do you guys maintain some semblance of a work-life balance in your demanding profession?
Okay, I'll go. So, okay, this is what I'll say. There are times when it's gotten really rough where I'm just like burning the midnight oil at both ends. And I wish I had a good answer for it, because I don't. It literally just comes down to, am I blocking time appropriately in Google Calendar, like focus time? I think that helps so much. It's so easy to wake up and be like, okay, I gotta change, you just throw on scrubs. That's the easy part. You run to the clinic, you take, pre-round, do all that all day, and then you come home and you're exhausted, and you gotta think about your world and this, that. So it's like, what helps is having just even if it's 2 or 3 days out in advance, having a little time block in your Google Calendar just for, what it is you want to get accomplished or get done. So I think that helps a lot. But also being able to kind of step away from projects when they're getting to be too much is an underrated but very important thing. Like, for example, these past 8 weeks during internal medicine, I was with a venture capital firm. I was like, hey, I just want to let you know, I'm going to probably have to take a little bit of a hiatus for these next 2 months because this is going to be. And I think in hindsight, I'm so glad that I did that, because I can come back, kind of more refreshed in the new year, have new ideas, different things I'm thinking about. So it's so easy, I feel like, for med students to find hard to say no. And of course, I always find that hard to do at any given day, but it's like, it is important. And that I think having that agency as much as you can over your own goal is important.
Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no. I'll edit it out.
I was gonna say, definitely being able to say no, is something that I've had to learn. I feel like it's so easy to, you see the next research project opportunity come up, or, some student club, and you want to take a leadership position, but like sometimes you can't handle everything, and you will be in over your head, and your mental health will suffer because of it. So I definitely echo being able to say no. And then also having a group of close friends that you can rely on, I feel like has been very helpful for me. Because then we all complain about the same things and we're all going through the same things at the end of the day. So kind of feel a little less crazy about how difficult it is to really get through medical school.
Absolutely. You can definitely commiserate and have this like cathartic moment where all of the stress kind of gets washed away because everyone else who is sitting across from you is experiencing the same thing. So yeah, I think that's all like really great advice there. And yeah, you bring up really good points about how medical school, like you have to say no at sometimes. And it's really painful because the incentive structures say like, if I say no to this opportunity, someone else is going to say yes. And so when you're competing for residencies and stuff and behind the scenes like that, I think that also weighs on you a little bit. But obviously your mental health, like you said, is the number one priority when it comes to this stuff. All righty. And so question number 2, do you have any last minute recommendations to students or graduates who are interested in pursuing a career similar to your own?
The way that I've thought about my career is like if I know that I want to go into healthcare innovation, it's like there's several different ways I think about healthcare innovation. You have the aspect of your clinical knowledge, the product knowledge for us, that's the engineering, the regulatory/policy knowledge, and then like the financial knowledge. And you want to build those pieces if you can, and learn from the masters in those spaces. So for example, like from an engineering standpoint, we had a great experience in Hopkins, but almost as important to that were the internships we were a part of. So like after my sophomore year, I worked at a early stage regenerative medicine company called BioRes, which has now been bought by Icon. They were developing an regenerative ACL graft for the knee. And it's like I was the first R&D intern there outside of their like core 2-person team at the time. So I had insight into every up and down, like even I couldn't sleep. And it's like, but those experiences really taught me so much about what you need to know to run a company effectively. So, that and my biomedical engineering experience gave me the product knowledge. Then it's like from a clinical standpoint, we're in medical school. From a financial standpoint, getting that knowledge, that was from kind of doing the consulting work, and then also working in venture capital, or at least, being part of that team and getting to sit in on some of the decisions and learn from that. And from a regulatory policy standpoint, Brooke and I are both very actively involved in the Indiana State Medical Association. And so we work with physicians and to find issues that are hopefully important to Hoosiers, but also can kind of push Indiana forward in terms of being technology ready, against the Californias and the Massachusetts of the world. And being able to think about all those things at the same time can be very hard, but it's very exciting because then when it all comes together, it's like beautiful. And especially when you meet people who have a unique intersection of expertise across different disciplines, then you know exactly what it is, what questions that they can answer for you and how you can best help them.
I would say my advice would be to really grow your network as much as you can and utilize, whether it's your school's network, whether it's cold emailing, reaching out to people and keeping in touch with them as time goes on. I think that's been one of the most helpful things for me, because now I feel like I have a whole group of people who I can reach out to for any type of advice that I might need. And even if I have someone that maybe I need their advice and I don't know them, cold emailing is the best thing you can do, because the worst they can do is ignore you. And I have been ignored so many times, it's not even funny. And then I think the other thing is just really follow your interests. I feel like for my career, I never really planned out what my life would be like, for better or worse. I just kind of had a vast set of interests, and I was kind of like, oh, that's cool. Like applying to NASA, I was like, oh, that's cool. It worked out, and I got lucky. But of course, there's things that haven't worked out. But I don't know. I think if you're passionate about whatever it is, you'll find a way to get there.
Excellent advice. I love that. And our final question for the night, and you guys might have already answered this already, it's probably pretty obvious, but what are your personal, professional, or business-oriented goals that you would like to accomplish in the next 5 to 10 years?
I'd like to get into residency. That's a big
Yeah,
goal
that's
of
a good
mine.
answer.
I mean, but realistically, yeah, I think setting myself up to match and be successful in match, I think is like definitely at the forefront of a lot of medical students' minds as they're in their third year. But I think thinking beyond that and trying to figure out what it looks like to be a physician innovator. So really trying to understand how to keep those engineering skills sharp as we dive deeper into clinical medicine, I think is something that's pretty important to me. I'm not quite sure how that's going to look. I'm still trying to figure that out myself, honestly. But I think that's probably my biggest kind of business and clinical goal, I would say.
Yeah, I think I would 100% agree. Getting into residency, getting to a point where I feel like I actually have something to offer to the patient than just echoing the resident or the attending's finding. But no, actually, I mean, I think I'm really excited to figure out what niche exactly I can best contribute to in medicine, where I can find the most excitement. And also being able to honestly carve out space to think about some of these like innovative solutions, I think is important. Like it's hard because there's no set out, for someone who wants to do a clinical career and, dabble in entrepreneurship and have some success in both, because in the worst case scenario, I would hate to be a mediocre physician to my patients and also like a mediocre entrepreneur as well. So figuring out how to do both of those well, learning from people who've done it already, I think is going to be the name of the game for the next decade.
I love it. I love it. Very good. Well, we've come to the end of our interview today, and I'd like to thank all of our listeners for the support. If you have any additional questions about the medical school journey, pharmacy practice, or entrepreneurial topics, check out my website at www.physicianpharmacist.com. Before we let you guys go, how can our listeners get in touch with you or learn more about you?
Yeah, so absolutely feel free to reach out to me anytime. My email is skarki at iu.edu. That's SKARKI. That's a good place to reach me. I've got a personal website as well, which is just myfullname.com. I've got a whole list of resources there that were crucial and helpful to me when we were first getting started. And I think reading is underrated, at least for me. I have been underrating reading the last couple of years, but I've been getting back into it recently, and it's been great. So that's the best way to learn someone else's perspective.
And I guess we both have LinkedIn, so that's an easy way to send a message or connect. And my email is my first name last name at gmail.com.
All right, perfect. Well, thank you so much, guys, for being on that episode. I know you're extremely busy, and obviously third year is crazy as is. So really do appreciate your time tonight.
Thanks, Nathan. Yeah, thanks so much for having us on the show. This is great.
Thank you.
Absolutely. All right, guys, take care.